Here's another rectangle example. So we are given our area that is 128 kilometers squared. Our width is 15 kilometers and we need to find L. So here's our formula, length times width is our area. Let's plug this in. So A is 120, length we do not know, and our width is 15. So now let's solve. First step, we are going to plug in this information into this formula. So A is 120 equals our length times our width. So length we do not know times width, which is 15. Second step, we are worried about getting L by itself. So that means we need to get rid of 15 since it's on the same side as L. We are multiplying by 15 right now. To get rid of it on the right side, we are going to divide by 15. And what we do on one side here, we have to do to the other. 15 over 15 cancels out into 1, and we don't have to worry about it because 1 times a number is itself. Next step, we just have to simplify this and solve for L. So I recognize that both of these numbers are able to be divided by 5. So that's what I'm going to do to make these a little bit smaller so that when we divide, it's a little bit easier to figure out our answer. So if we divide both of these by 5, so 15 divided by 5, we get 3. And now we have 5 can go into 120 how many times? So 5 can't go into 1, 5 can go into 12, and it can go into 12 2 times. So 5 times 12, or 5 times 2 gives us 10. So we would have 2 left over, and 5 can go into 20 4 times. So if you don't like to use this method, you can set it up to do the long division by putting your 120 and your house and having the 5 outside and solving that way. But now we have 24 and 3. So 3 can go into 24 8 times exactly. And then our units are kilometers, and that is our length. So here's one last example of a triangle problem. So these numbers are a little bit bigger. I'm just warning you now that this is a longer problem, so you might want to use a new piece of notebook paper if you're working through these with me. Also, we are going to be getting decimal answers, so it will not work out perfectly like the ones we have been doing. So now we're going to pull out all the information that we do know. So our area we know is 140. We know our base is 16, and our height we do not know. First step, we are plugging all this information into our formula. So our area is 140. We keep our 1/2 times our base, which is 16, times our height, which we do not know. Next step, we're starting to worry about getting h by itself, so we need to start moving numbers away from this side to over here. So right now, I'm going to focus on the whole number that we have. So we have 16 times h. To get rid of 16 on this side, you guessed it, we have to divide. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So by doing that, it crosses out our 16s. We don't have to worry about it. And we're left with 140 divided by, or over 16 equals 1/2 times h. The next thing we will have to do is simplify this before we start dividing. So right now I'm not going to worry about this, I'm going to worry about simplifying. So they both end in even numbers, so we know that it's both divisible by 2, but then if we think about our rules of division, any number where its last 2 numbers are divisible by 4, the whole number is divisible by 4. So we know 4 can go into 16, no problem. And the last 2 numbers of this one are 40, which 40 can go into. So what I'm going to do is divide both of these numbers by 4 to simplify it, so we're working with smaller numbers. So based on what we know, 4 can go into 16 4 times. It's also a perfect square. 4 times 4 gives us 16. I'm going to show my work over here. If I do 4 divided by, or 140 divided by 4, so 4 can't go into 1. 4 can go into 14 3 times. 4 times 3, we would get 12. You subtract, we would have 2 left over, carry our 0. 4 can go into 25 times. 4 times 5 is 20 exactly. We would have nothing left over. So if we simplify this, here would be our new answer for 140 over 16 is equivalent to 35 over 4, and then our 1/2 times h stays the same. So next step I'm doing is 35 divided by 4. I got 35 and 4 from right up here, and we're just going to solve. So 4 cannot go into 3, but 4 can go into 35. So take a second to think about what number might work. So if you do 4 times 9, that would be too big. We would get 36. So if we try 8, that's our next closest one. So 4 times 8, we get 32. Now we subtract 35 minus 32. We would get 3. So 4 cannot go into 3. Before we create a 0 and pull that down, we need to add a decimal point. So if we add our 0, so 4 can go into 30, not exactly, but if we do 4 times 8, we get 32. It's too big. So let's try 7. So 7 times 4, you would get 28. Subtract, we get 0. 4 cannot go into 2. So we add another 0, carry that down. And finally, we have a number it can go into evenly. So 4 can go into 25 times 20, and we have no remainder. So our 8.75, or 8 75/100ths, is also equal to 35 over 4. So we're going to plug this number into our formula moving forward, and I'll write it down here as our next step. So I ran out of space already, so I started a new one, but like I just said, we're going to plug in 8.75 wherever we see a 35 over 4. So that's what I did. So we have the same idea. We have 8 75/100ths equals 1/2 times h. So we are still trying to get h by itself. We need to get rid of 1/2. So we're multiplying by 1/2. Instead of dividing by a fraction, we multiply by the opposite reciprocal. What we do on this side, we have to do over here. Now we finally have h by itself over here. I am starting to multiply 8 75/100ths times 2 over 1. So I'll just put that over 1, so we're multiplying by 2 fractions. So now we're doing 8 75/100ths times 2. Remember, when we're multiplying, you don't just drag the decimal point down. We have to count how many decimal places are after our decimal. So now we'll just solve. 2 times 5, we get 10. 2 times 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15. And then we have 8 times 2, we get 16, plus 1 is 17. So we don't have any decimal points after our 2, but if we look up here, we have 1 spot, 2 spots after our decimal point. So we have to move it in 2 spots from here. So we always start on the outside, we would move it in 1 spot, 2 spots, there's our answer. So after 10 steps, we got our final answer of 17 5/10 feet for our height. This problem, I warned you, it was longer than the others, but it's just because we had to do the extra steps of doing a little extra math to figure out some conversions and long division. So the last thing I wanted to point out is to make sure when you're doing these problems you stay organized, because if you miss one step or you miss one decimal point or forget to carry a number, it will end up giving you the wrong answer most likely. So I know it takes up a lot of space. I used almost 2 whole pages of notebook paper, but I promise you it is worth it when you get the right answer. And I know this seems like a lot of steps, it is, but this is all stuff that you know how to do. This problem is basically pulling together everything that we have worked on this year in 5th grade. So being able to do problems like these are something you should be super, super proud of.